Welcome back, everybody. This Week in America. Great to have you with us on the program today. Website thisweekinamerica.us. Deke Rivers is a retired architect who now lives in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. As a child, his family escaped Estonia when the Red Army invaded during World War II. The Rivers family moved to Europe, then Australia, then Canada, eventually settling in the United States for 15 years. Finally, Deke returned to Canada in 2012. As an architect, he traveled extensively with stops in Australia, Canada, the U.S. in Nantucket, Dallas, Las Vegas, Atlanta, Fairbanks, also a stop along the way in the Philippines. He designed numerous recording studios, witnessing the birth of rock and roll and its evolution in his youth in Australia, as well as during his teen years in Canada and the U.S. In fact, that's the topic of one of his novels, The Singer and His Songs. As an author, Deke has written 19 novels with 20 ready to go, most based on his research, his travels, and vivid imagination. A frequent guest on This Week in America, and we welcome him back. Deke Rivers with us on the program. Hi, Deke. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you very much. Great to be back, man.
It is always a pleasure to have you on the show. This time we're talking about a new book called The New England Seduction. This is a Deke Rivers novel. This is a fascinating story, and we don't want to give away too much. We'll give you a little bit of the highlights of the book, and you can get information available by going to Amazon, barnesandnoble.com. You can link on directly by going to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, and Deke Rivers' website, which is dekeriversauthor.com. So we've got, this is a real stretch here. We've got a young architect that's the main man, and I mentioned you use a lot of your experiences in the book. Let's talk about the architect, Cody Cooper. Talk about him.
Cody's a guy that had a problem in his teenage years, and decided he would, instead of becoming a rock artist, he became an architect, which he had a passion for anyway. And but he stuck to what they call conceptual design, which is basically evolving around the design of a building, or the shape, the sizes, meeting the client's needs, and becoming or achieving a design that is basically related to the client's requirements, but making a beautiful building out of it. Regretfully, there's a lot of architects in today's practicing world that create a building from the outside in, and whether the things work out inside is irrelevant as long as it looks beautiful from the outside. So there's two different concepts there. But in this book, he's a concept architect and thrives on that issue.
And as the book starts, he's off to a convention in Las Vegas. Talk a little bit about, without giving too much away, what happens there, because that sort of sets the tone for the entire book. And we're talking about the New England Seduction, a new book by Deke Rivers.
Right. The architect's profession usually has a convention somewhere around the United States where basically it's an opportunity for all the manufacturers of architectural or building products to sell their products to wares to architects, and to make the actual builders and developers aware of new concepts and ideas which create better looking buildings basically. But on his visit to Las Vegas, he teams up with a young lady who's from another one of the other booths basically, and they have an affair, and it's a once in a lifetime situation. They're both single still, and but for some unknown reason they just they click like crazy, but they don't exchange telephone numbers. So it's just seemingly a one-off shot, and they disappear into the woodwork again.
It's interesting because in a number of Deke's books, and I mentioned he's got 19 that are available. You can find the information linking onto our website, going to Deke's website, dekeriversauthor.com. A lot of them revolve around an architect. A number of them do, and that was where you spent over 40 years of your life as an architect. As I'm reading the book, I'm fascinated by what an architect does, and I'm thinking as you're talking about it there really is some glamour connected with being an architect, designing buildings, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the profession itself, it gives you pride to be able to take somebody's requirements and create a building out of it. And when I was working on the recording studios, I mean, we had to, we had two things to do. We had to have a a almost like a symbol that projected the actual the intent of the recording studio from the outside, that would attract and sort of become like an attraction for other artists to come and record at that particular studio. So yeah, there's a pride that comes in creating a beautiful looking building, and it's built into you. I guess it is.
Well, it is, and as you're reading the books, in this case, the New England Seduction, you've got these fascinating characters that you're reading about, and you've got this occupation, architecture, this career, this lifestyle, and it's like, okay, this is very interesting. I didn't realize this went into designing a building, interior, exterior, or whatever. One of the fascinating aspects of the book, and this is called The New England Seduction. Deke Rivers, our guest on This Week in America, author, architect, artist, and poet. And we're talking, in this case, the young architect, and he returns home. Let's talk about how that happens. He goes back to see his parents in the small town, and suddenly things change for everybody.
Yeah, he gets involved. He goes back to visit his parents, and all of a sudden he's sitting on their porch in this little town of a little hollow town in Maine, on the coast there by the Arcadia National Park, and a beautiful part of the country. Rugged shorelines and beaches, and walks through the national park there, and. He's suddenly struck by this young lady who comes out of nowhere and who happens to be working in one of the hotels, and all of a sudden there's a love affair that starts to develop out of these two, and both are looking for someone and both have been looking for a while, I guess, for someone to care for, and all of a sudden they find each other. So it's just a snowball effect sort of thing.
And this happens in an area that's close to the Canadian border, up in New England, up in Maine. So it's sort of I don't necessarily say remote, secluded, but it's not like a major metropolitan area that you're dealing with.
No, far from it. It's a little tourist town on the Atlantic coast there, but it's right adjacent to the Arcadia National Park, which is almost like a little island attached to the mainland, and. It's just a beautiful, deserted, rocky place with beautiful scenes, and a gorgeous place to visit, that's for sure.
You've got romance, you've got sex, you've got drug trafficking, you've got revenge, all of those elements in the book, The New England Seduction. How did this book come about? Where did the idea come from?
I tell you, after 20 books, or 22 now, in fact, where these inspirations come from, I don't really know. The idea, being an architect, of course, has its base, and also the music industry plays a big part in my life, because I've always been involved with the music. I grew up in Australia, where music was one of the few things that I could get my hands on. Being a penniless DP basically down there back in the early 50s, and the music's always been a part. So the story starts with the music, and then it goes into architecture, and then develops from there.
Yeah, you mentioned DP, and that's an interesting part of displaced persons. You started over about 3 times. The background is fascinating. Growing up, as I mentioned, in Estonia during World War II.
We escaped from Estonia when the Russians came in, and we made our way to Europe, where we then got stuck with the distribution of Europe, and everything was handed over to Stalin. So when the Berlin airlift started, we got the hell out of Europe, because everybody was convinced that Stalin was going to invade the rest of Europe. And so the U.S. and Australia were offering package deals to the DP families, that the parents, the father would have to work for the country wherever the government put him to work for 3 years, and they would then pay your way to either Australia or Canada or the United States. And my parents, for whatever reason, picked Australia to go to. So we just got up and left and tried to start life all over again. Australia was sort of in its early stages of development, and there was no housing. The wages were low. The economy was, I guess, average across the board. But for a family with nothing, we were living at times in one room, four of us, in somebody else's home, and that always caused friction. So I was changing schools every year that we were there for 10 years, and finally my parents just had enough and said, let's try Canada. So we moved to Canada.
As you read the story and all that you went through, as I mentioned, 3 times basically having to start all over, you mentioned moving around and being taken out of school, put into a new school, all of the different situations, and I can see a lot of negatives there, and you came out with an education, a career, a very prominent architect, doing that for over 40 years. How difficult was that for you to attain all of that with what you went through growing up?
I guess in many ways, Rick, I became what you would call a loner, and I sort of accepted the fact that this was going to be my life, and I put my hands in fate, and I said to myself, every day that you're awake, you got to learn something, you got to do something, you got to, if you by yourself, look around and see what you can pick up. And I guess with fate's help and with my own determination to keep on surviving, I became a survivor, but in many senses a loner. So I have no problems in keeping myself company and being away from the family at extended periods of time. But it was part of my life. I just guess it just became something that I was accustomed to, and it never bothered me. I could entertain myself quite readily doing whatever.
It's interesting because for so many people that would be, you'd reach a breaking point at some time during all of this, and what you're saying is it really made you stronger. It made you who you are today.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Deke Rivers, our guest on the program. The book we're talking about, the newest, is The New England Seduction, a Deke Rivers novel. It's available at Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com. DekeRiversAuthor.com is Deke's website. You can get information, link on directly by going to our website, thisweekinamerica.us. How much fun was this story for you to tell? This really is an intriguing story. When you start out, do you have any idea how this is going to end, or do you end up getting there at the same time we do as we're reading?
Now, typically, the storyline is always there in my head at the start, and but filling in the spaces is where I have fun, because then I'm able to create different sidelines and different stories, and the characters that I pick, each one has their own life to tell, so it sort of expands from there. But the basic storyline usually is in my head from start to finish.
As I'm reading, and of course I have a knowledge of your background, I can see so much of that, and I'm thinking back over the course of your career as you're growing up, and then the 40 years in architecture. It seems almost like you're sort of keeping a notebook. Maybe it wasn't written down, but a mental notebook. Are you good at observation? Is that where a lot of this comes from?
Yeah, with photography, with art, my artwork, I guess I see things differently than most people do, because I can see the beauty. It's funny, even with architecture. You walk past a building and you look at the building. So yeah, that's nice. And then after you've taken the architecture course, you walk past that building and you see total different things. Those window proportions are wrong. That's
right.
The color and the selection of the colors of the materials that have been used is inappropriate for that building. You start seeing things differently, and I guess that's always been there. I can to me, being in the middle of a country stream in a little forest somewhere and looking at all the beautiful colored leaves that have fallen to the ground is to me exciting. And others would just walk through there and not even see it, but I see it, and it has made a difference without a doubt.
A couple minutes left in the program. We're talking with Deke Rivers. His new book we're talking about is called The New England Seduction. We're talking about a young architect, Cody Cooper, and let's just close by talking about that. Here's someone that we follow throughout the course of the book. What is it like when you develop a character like that and you take him from start to finish in the book? What's it like when it's over with and you feel the satisfaction that I really told a good story with Cody?
I guess it's almost like a fantasy for myself.
Yes.
And I lived through the character through the whole story, and it's almost like creating my own life story again.
Exactly.
And it's fun. I have to admit, I am enjoying writing books much more than I ever enjoyed architecture.
Now, that's interesting because I get the impression when you're talking about architecture that this really is a lifelong love that you had and have with architecture. But you're saying, actually, well, again, it's part of the creative process. Rather than doing it, with steel and concrete, you're doing it with words, and this obviously is fun for you.
Yeah, it is. It is fun. I'm enjoying it, and in fact, one of the books that I'm working on right now is my own life story of what I did through the course of my years. But to make it into a novel, I've taken this particular architect, writer, whatever, artist, and sent him to Paris, and where he meets a journalist, and the journalist realizes that he's a DP who has become a writer, and she figures it's going to be a good story to tell the people of Europe through their monthly or weekly news magazines. So they team up and they start publishing his life story through this book. So
I am looking forward to that. Is that going to be out soon?
I'm still working on that one right now.
When we finish, go back and.
I've just finished 2 books right now. One's my first Western, and then the second one's sort of a.
That I'm looking forward to too.
And a mediocre type James Bond, not the Bond that Fleming or has developed now over the years, but everyday individual's James Bond type character who does feasible things that a normal feasible guy could do.
There are 19 books that are out there written by Deke Rivers. They're all excellent books. The one we've talked about today is called The New England Seduction, a Deke Rivers novel. It's available at DekeRiversAuthor.com. It's available at Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com. You can link onto our website, thisweekinamerica.us, and go directly to Deke's website. Several more books in the works. We'll have Deke back on the program. It is always a pleasure coming to us from one of my favorite cities, Toronto. Thank you, Deke. Deke, once again, for being with us on the program.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
It is always a pleasure, and we're talking with Deke Rivers. The book is The New England Seduction. It's available all across the country. Information at Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com, and DekeRiversAuthor.com. This Week in America, back after these messages.